Welcome to Beyond Names. I'm Dr. Habib. This is a space for spiritual seekers and soulful misfits, for the curious and the committed, for those grounded in a tradition, and for those who are not sure what they believe. Whether you call the divine God, Yahweh, Allah, Elohim, Hashem, Brahman, Great Spirit, higher power, or you're still searching for language that fits, you are welcome here. Together, we'll explore the intersection of spirituality and daily life, the wisdom of many traditions, and the ways we return to our true self, to our source, to the light each of us carry within. I'm so glad you're here. Let's begin with introduction of our conversation partner for this episode, Dr. Rose Aslan. Rose is a community healing practitioner, breathwork and somatics facilitator, podcaster, writer, explorer, and storyteller. She's passionate about supporting others, especially Muslims, on their healing path and guiding spiritual seekers to reflect the Rahmah, the compassion of the divine in their lives. She focuses on embodiment, bringing together her academic and analytical perspective with her healing centered work to guide people to a sense of heartfulness and presence. She received her PhD from the University of North Carolina, her MA in Arabic and Islamic civilizations from the American University in Cairo, and her BA in Near Eastern and Religious Studies from the University of British Columbia. She spent several decades studying and then teaching religious and Islamic studies. She was formerly an associate professor at California Lutheran University, but quit academia to pursue a slower and more holistic way of life. She continues writing on topics connected to Islam, but for a more general audience. She's the author of a recently published monograph, Muslim Prayer in American Public Life, and is currently writing a book on trauma-informed and compassion-centered approaches to Islam. She's also currently cultivating the Center for Rahmah Connections, an organization that offers discreet, curated matchmaking grounded in Islamic and Sufi values. To learn more about her work, please visit compassionflow.com, and you can also find her on Substack and social media. Dr. Rose, thank you for being here. Welcome. If you would, if you would start us off by sharing your spiritual story, of course, to the extent that you're comfortable as a way of introducing yourself to our listeners.
Yeah, thank you, Habib. I really appreciate the invitation and to be in this space that really feels a place where one can be authentic and true and to tell our story. So I appreciate the space you've opened up with your podcast. Yeah, so my spiritual story, I'm going to try to keep it on the shorter side because I can go long with that story since I've been alive for a number of years. Um, I always go back to when I was a little girl. Because I grew up in a fairly abusive home,
Mm,
I wasn't always a very happy child. I was a fearful child, and I lived a life that was pretty difficult because I had to keep myself safe. And I don't think because I wasn't very happy per se, I'm sure I had moments of happiness, but it just didn't seem like a very safe world. I think
yeah.
that's what led me to probe deeper questions. As a very young child, I was
Mm,
always just so curious with the meaning of life and religion. I was the girl who didn't have any pop bands on my posters on my walls, but I had National Geographic subscription. And if you remember back in the days when they came with those fold out posters from National
yes.
Geographic, I had
Yeah.
those on my wall, as well as like photos of the Dalai Lama, who I was like obsessed with during remember the Free Tibet movement in the 90s was very popular. So I had his picture and all the National Geographic maps and cultural kind of information on my wall. That was what I was interested. I was interested in the world. I was just so
Yeah.
curious. But I was
Yeah.
particularly interested in spirituality and the deeper questions. I remember when I was, I don't know, 11, 12, reading books by Hermann Hesse, who was a German, I don't know if you call him existentialist, but he was like a philosophical novelist. And he wrote books one about like the story of the Buddha in novel form and other books about spiritual journeys. And I was really obsessed with his work when I was a young girl. And he opened my mind and my eyes up to Buddhism, for example. And from there, I started to learn about the Dalai Lama and Buddhism. And I think it was when I was 11 years old, the Dalai Lama came to my city. And
Mhm.
because I was a nerdy little girl and I had a nice dad, my mother was the difficult one. My dad was very supportive. My parents were divorced.
Mhm.
He let me go to this big conference, and for a whole week, he dropped me off to go spend time with the Dalai Lama and a number of other significant people. And
Wow.
my whole world opened up because there's a lot of Nobel Prize laureates, and I was like speaking to them, and just people are very nice to speak to me. They were surprised to see this little girl there. But he had special meetings with the youth. And so
Mm.
I was just so blown away with the wisdom I was receiving and hearing from the Dalai Lama. So I say from that time on, I entered slightly for 11-year-old serious spiritual path.
Mhm.
And all the way through middle school and high school, I was studying different religions. I grew up in San Francisco, where I basically had the whole world at my doorsteps, which was a great place. With a bus pass, I could explore different religious communities. So I would be going to different places. I was part of the youth center at the Buddhist Zen Center, for example. I took a world religion class in high school, and we got to go explore different communities. And I was just, for some reason, really pushed to understanding the world around me because
Mm.
it was just felt really hard, and I just needed to understand why I existed. So it was that one question that I always ask people is, what is the
Mhm.
meaning of life? What is the purpose? Like, why am I here? And I never really got a solid answer. Um, I until I started to encounter Islam, actually through Sufism.
Mm.
Later in high school, I had started reading Rumi because, he comes through one's lap just when you start to read that sort of work. And I remember reading Rumi, and I didn't really understand it, but I liked it. And I thought I probably understood it, but now have no idea what I was thinking. Um, but I was really interested in what he had to offer. And then as I came to learn about the whirling dervishes, I was hooked.
Mm. Oh.
That's when I got to college. I had come across a Sufi community in Vancouver where I was going to college, and there were some whirling dervishes, and I attended dhikr or Sufi gatherings with them, and I was just felt so comfortable and so at home.
Mm.
But for my third year of university, I went to Egypt.
Mhm.
And there I attended a lot of different Sufi gatherings, and it was there I decided to become Muslim.
Mhm.
And not because I wanted to become Muslim, because I wanted to become a whirling dervish, but I encountered this man, actually Shams Friedlander, who passed away a few years ago, who's a famous director who directed some films about Sufism. He was teaching at the university where I was studying in Cairo, and I read
Mhm.
this book by his. When you hear hoofbeats, think of a zebra. And it was such a beautiful meditation on presence and dhikr and simplicity of being a Sufi, I think it was. And when I
Mm.
found out he taught at the university I was at, I asked if I could speak with him and meet him, and he agreed, and we met numerous times. And when I asked him this question, what is the purpose of life? I felt like he gave me the answer that I was actually looking for. Um,
Mm.
and it was a Quranic verse um,
Mhm.
where God says, I only created humans and jinn um, to worship me. So the purpose of existence is that so we may worship God. Now at that time I was like, worship means prayer. That's how I understood it. So I like started praying a lot. At this age of my life, I understand worship as meaning much more than literal prayer. Um,
Yeah.
but at that time, but I love the idea of like worship is our purpose. Because I
Mm.
was really into ritual. I like to practice different rituals of various religious traditions.
Mhm.
I've always been an ethnographer, and maybe ever since I watched Indiana Jones, I was like interested. I always say attribute my interest in academia and studying cultures and civilizations because of Indiana Jones, because that's the only exposure we had back in those days, you know. But I really wanted to explore the world getting ancient treasures. Like I kind of want to do that. I was more interested in the cultures. So I think I was always interested in anthropology and ethnography.
Yeah.
and studying human behavior. And
Mm.
so I used to participate and kind of observe a lot of different human rituals and behaviors. So I became Muslim not because I was interested in Islam, but because I was interested in Sufism. And he told me that the only way to be Sufi is to be Muslim as well. You can't separate Islam
Mm.
from Sufism. And I was reluctant in the beginning to become Muslim because
Mm.
this was the days before the internet was very, very popular. We didn't have
Mm.
YouTube or social media. And my understanding of Islam was very limited to Not Without My Daughter, the film, and the regular propaganda. And
Mm.
I also had met a lot of mainstream, more conservative Muslims, and their way of seeing Islam as like a point system and a like a reward and punishment system was very unappealing to me. It definitely wasn't
Mm.
what I was looking for. But when I started to meet Muslims who talked about Islam as a much deeper, esoteric, metaphysical approach to following this path to God, I was really invested. Before that, I had gone to on a backpacking trip to Eastern Europe and accidentally ended up in Turkey, Istanbul, where I was looking for the whirling dervishes, and I found them in tourist settings, and I wasn't that interested in them because obviously it was just a tourist trap. But I traveled throughout Turkey and I ended up
Mhm.
in Eastern Turkey. And then I met backpackers going to Iran, and I ended up in Iran. And I was looking for for Sufis there. I didn't know what I was looking for, but when I ended up in the beautiful city of Isfahan in Iran, and I was asking people, "Do you know where I can find the Sufis?" This is me like going to a random city in Iran asking people, "Where do I find the Sufis?" And they led me to this shop in the bazaar, the gigantic bazaar of Isfahan, and it was a shop of a man who makes mirror mosaics. Now, if you've ever seen a mosque in Iran, the interior is full of these amazing mirror mosaics, so the entire mosque looks like shimmering. So that's what he did was make those mirror mosaics. He didn't speak English. I didn't speak Persian. Yet I had the most profound exchange with this man.
Mm.
He took his mirror, like a little piece of a mirror, and he kind of sh put on his heart, like, and he gave me this lesson about the fact that we need to have our hearts to be like this mirror so that when it's clean and when it can shine, it can reflect the divine light. And I took a lot out from that exchange, and we had spent quite a bit of time together. And I'm not sure how, but we were able to communicate quite well. And from that time, I also been very invested in learning that kind of spirituality. So something in
Mhm.
Sufism really spoke to me, and I was a very young woman. But my time in Iran and then in Egypt and spending a lot of time in Sufi gatherings just led me on this path of spirituality. Now, I call it my path of spirituality because for many years I was on this path. I ended up soon after marrying a man who's Egyptian Sufi Muslim,
Mhm.
from a very traditional, maybe more conservative background. And at that time, I was also studying. I ended up staying in Egypt to do my master's degree. I was studying Islam in academic context, but at the same time, I was married to someone who had a very patriarchal approach to Islam and a
Mm.
very hierarchical approach to Sufism. And so, in a way, it felt like he took away my spiritual agency. Um,
Mm.
and I call it a Sufi cult, essentially, is what I entered into. And so,
Mm.
although I was on a deep spiritual journey, it was also a very unhealthy one at that time and for many years, where I was
Mhm.
trying to develop um, my spiritual path, but it was quite difficult when someone was controlling everything in my life and controlling my access to spiritual teachers and everything else. So it was definitely that time in my life. I was married for 14 years, was a difficult time where I was
Mm.
at the university studying for many years academic approaches to Islam, and I was saying Sufism. My master's thesis was about a Sufi poem. My PhD, my whole program, I was studying Islam, I was studying Sufi text. And I
Mhm.
was going to Sufi gatherings, but internally I was a wreck. I was a mess. I was so conflicted.
Mm. Mm.
Um, and it wasn't until I ended up leaving my ex-husband when my spiritual journey started to parallel with a healing journey. Now I
Mm.
thought that spirituality could in a sense, heal me from all the difficulty I had as a young
Hmm.
girl.
Hmm.
But it turned out spirituality alone can't heal you. And I thought it could. I was waiting to meet someone who was so strong in their spiritual power that they would like pray over me and I'd be better. Fortunately, I never found that
Hmm.
person. It turns out the best person to pray over me was myself, when I had the approach to really support myself in my walking and open
Hmm.
myself up to the divine. So in my mid 30s, my spiritual path paralleled, intersected with my healing path, and that's really, I like to credit, that's when it really became much more fruitful.
Hmm. Hmm. You can't stop there.
Oh, oh, I can't stop there. Okay. Sorry.
No, no. You must keep going.
Okay, okay,
By that I mean, I really want to hear more about
okay, okay.
this parallel of spiritual journey and the healing
Sure.
journey. And
Yeah, so my ex was from a village in Egypt, so all those years I was married to him, I didn't have a therapist, I didn't know anything about mental health. And of course, as an older millennial, just mental health wasn't part of vocabulary. And
Mhm,
so it wasn't until the end of my marriage when I first got a therapist. And I didn't get a
mhm,
therapist because I was worried about my marriage. I didn't realize my marriage was abusive. I got a therapist because I was experiencing bullying from a colleague that was really quite severe.
mhm,
And when I started to meet with this therapist, she started to notice that when I spoke with my ex-husband, it was kind of a little strange and
mhm,
unsettling to her. And so she started to probe me and ask questions about my marriage. And it was during those sessions and also some other events that happened where I started to realize I was in a very difficult and abusive marriage. And so slowly the everything, my facade of my marriage and how I saw my ex-husband start to crumble. And I
mhm.
started to realize that I had a lot of work to do, a lot of healing work. And when I
Yeah.
left my ex-husband, wow, that was hard because I became a single mom overnight with a
Mhm,
really demanding job as an assistant professor on the tenure track, living in Los Angeles, a very high cost of living city, with a
mhm.
4-year-old. So life
Wow.
was really hard. And I was trying to get tenure, I was trying to raise my little guy.
Yeah.
And I definitely had many, many dark nights of the soul. Although dark nights of the soul and existential crisis are something I've experienced my whole life, that was a whole other level of difficulty. But I did start to do the work in terms of having therapy. I found a somatic therapist, and when I started to, with this somatic therapist, realize and learn I had a body, I literally didn't
Mhm.
know. I wasn't aware of my body. I had
Yeah.
experienced, I didn't have interoception. I didn't have very good knowledge of what was going on within me. And that's
Mhm,
because primarily I was disassociated from my body. And I think that was a result of growing up in an abusive home. And
mhm,
so when I started to learn I had a body and that I could feel it and that it could actually help me in my healing journey, that's where my growth started to happen, even though there was a lot of hard steps along the way. And it happened not in a Muslim or Sufi setting, but just with a lot of different women healing. I tried a lot of different healing modalities. I was so desperate. I tried everything. Like I've been to shamans, I've been to like all the different regular healing modalities, like, like for physical pain, just acupuncture, chiropractor, all kinds of retreats, all kinds of
mhm,
women's gatherings. I really
mhm,
found my healing among other women,
mhm,
especially for the years leading after my divorce. I had to really seek refuge with other women. I felt a lot of pain, just from men, from the betrayal I experienced with my ex-husband and his spiritual guide.
mhm,
I felt betrayed by the Muslim community in general who didn't support me during the divorce, even though I was quite an active member of the mosque that I was participating in. And it was during the Me Too movement when I left my ex-husband, so it just felt like a
mhm,
really ugly time. There's a lot of different male Muslim scholars who were being exposed at that time for various sexual misconduct. and it
Mhm.
felt really hard. Islam and Muslim communities did not feel like a refuge for me. So it was primarily in the company of
Mhm.
other women that I
Yeah.
participated and I walked this path of healing. There was a time when I almost was going to leave Islam, quite a few times,
Mm.
because it
Mm.
just felt so oppressive, so patriarchal. Like, why am I going to stay in a religion that hates me because of my gender? Why am I going to stay in a religion that doesn't seem to want me to live a good life? You know,
Mhm.
I was really angry, really
Mm.
upset, really
Mm.
broken for a
Mm.
time. Um,
Mm.
but as I started to walk this path and get a little bit better, and then I suppose what happened is I got tenure,
Mhm.
COVID hit, and then I had more crises, as many of us did.
Yeah.
But um, I was able to get partial medical leave at that time. So it was
Mhm.
COVID. I was working a little bit less. My son and I mainly were able to just wander around hiking trails, spend a lot of time
Mhm.
in nature to slow down. And I just started to find myself again a bit.
Mm.
Still quite confused. But as a result of getting tenure, I was able to go on a sabbatical,
Mhm.
which was such an amazing reward for 6 or 7 grueling years of non-stop work and giving my entire body and soul to my university.
Yeah.
So as a result, even though it was during COVID, I decided to continue with my sabbatical year, and so we went to Istanbul. And I thought, okay, we'll spend a nice year in Istanbul, and I'll return to the university, and life will go on. But when I went to Istanbul, the first months were incredibly hard because
Mm.
I had spent a little bit of time in Istanbul before, but I didn't know much Turkish. I didn't know many people in Istanbul. It was
Mhm.
winter. I'm from
Mhm.
California. It was snowing. I realized that I was there. I was a single mom in the middle of winter in Istanbul in a very Turkish neighborhood.
Mm.
Um, what the hell was I doing? What the hell was I doing? So after like 6 months, I started to get to know people, started
Yeah.
to like settle down. The lockdown got a little bit better. I
Yeah.
started to realize that the time I had to rest became quite powerful.
Mm.
Because on a sabbatical, I did propose to work on some research projects, but I
Mhm.
mainly just focused on learning how to rest. Like, what does rest actually mean? Deciding that today I want to wander the city, while my son's at school, or today I want to just read a book on the couch, and just learning how to do that. I didn't actually
Mm.
know what rest was. I didn't realize how tired, how burnt out, how exhausted I was at that
Mhm.
point. And being able to be in a city that, is Muslim majority, I guess you can say. It has a Muslim culture where I
Mhm.
could spend time in beautiful mosque, um, was very healing for me at that time.
Mm.
I was able to heal my connection with Islam in
Mhm.
Istanbul
Mhm.
through various ways. I spent time in numerous different Sufi communities. I spent a lot of time in, they have a lot of Sufi music gatherings, and
Mm.
um, that can be multi-day gatherings at times. I did a
Mhm.
lot of regular healing work and a lot of spiritual work, and it was very intense. And
Mhm.
after the year, I realized that I couldn't go back to academia. And
Mm.
so part of my healing and spiritual journey was quitting a career that on the surface was very prestigious. I had built up all my social capital. I put all of my past 20 years into becoming a tenured professor. And I
Mm.
decided to blow it all up because I realized that the title, while it was nice to have the prestige, wasn't worth anything if I couldn't have my health and myself and have agency over myself.
Right.
So I decided to quit with no plan specifically.
Mm.
I did get training as a coach and started to do breath work and all the trainings I started to do as a coach, somatics, all
Mhm.
really helped me on my walking. And
Mm.
over the many years, I had also started to help women, especially Muslim women. Even when I was a professor, I used to host women's groups, Muslim women's groups, but it just came to I started to do a lot more when I obviously got certified as a coach and realized that because I've been through
Mhm.
a lot of women resonated with my story. A lot of other women were hurting too. And so that
Mm.
I found ways to also support women and they started to come to me and ask for support as well. And
Mhm.
so at that point, my spiritual healing path became very powerful to the point that I was able to have enough within myself to start to
Mhm.
flow and to allow other people to see some of that. And
Mm.
so I've been walking this path now of working on my own spirituality, my own healing, while also having enough flow in my cup. I again talking about Rahmah, this divine compassion. I feel that
Mm.
when we're open to receive this Rahmah from the divine, that we're able to allow it to flow out of ourselves too. So when I have enough of that, then it can flow
Mhm.
out of me and then I can support others as well. So it's now my life journey to support other women on their path as well.
I just had to make a note of that last one about receiving Rahma so it can flow through you because I have so many things that I want to follow up on. And,
Yeah.
obviously, we're not going to spend 12 hours. So we'll see what comes up. But
Yeah.
so I want to, in some respects, go back to the beginning,
Hmm.
in that I really resonated personally with what you said about your childhood. Um, And I remember my own experience of not feeling safe and um and living in fear, which is some of the same words that you use. And I remembered for myself, one of the outcomes of being terrified all the time, and one of the outcomes of other childhood experiences was checking out and disassociating from my body. And you specifically mentioned the same thing, being disassociated from your body. Uh, and in many ways, not having any sort of intelligence around mental health, emotional intelligence. If you had asked me, um, you're like, what are you feeling? I'd have been like, like, so, and yet I love the fact that in your bio, you specifically mention embodiment. And, uh, and I feel a kinship in terms of, although our story is not the same, obviously, uh, but I do feel like for me, through the path of Sufism, it was as if faith snuck up on me. Like
Mm.
I had turned away from anything to do with religion because of my childhood experiences, and part of those childhood experiences involved the church um, that my family attended. So I had turned away from anything to do with God or religion, but through Sufism and Sufi practices, it was like faith and strength got built up in me without me even really being aware of it. And because of that, it was as if that was what enabled me. That newfound strength and that newfound faith is what enabled me to face things about myself that I've never faced before. It's what enabled me to learn how to identify what I was experiencing emotionally. It's the faith and the strength that came through that, um, through the experience of calm or the experience of peace, like all these new things that I experienced through spirituality that enable me to begin to address, like, to even learn what is abuse, what is not abuse, like what,
Mm.
and so on. So, all of which to say is, I so much want to hear more about what embodied spirituality means to you,
Such a
given
great
this,
question. Yeah.
given this journey
Yeah.
that you have
Yeah.
been
Thank
on,
you
and
for
of course,
asking. And for reflecting on it. It's interesting to hear about the parallels in your own experience as well. When you were talking, I was like, oh, I'm so jealous that you got to find a healthy Sufi community in the early years. Like for me, I had to
yeah,
go on a very
yeah.
circuitous journey where I had met good communities in Vancouver. I actually had met good people in Egypt, but unfortunately, because I fell in with my ex and his Sufi guide,
Mhm.
unfortunately, my even though I always loved going to dhikrs, to Sufi gatherings, I just loved the peace I felt. I couldn't name it. I didn't have that embodied intelligence at that time. So when I entered into their way of being Sufi, it was not a healthy way of being Sufi. So I can't
Mm.
say that my experience was the same when I entered Sufism or entered the
Right.
path with them specifically, because
Yeah.
it was not a healthy way. It was, unfortunately, my ex-husband, um, and his sheikh were very involved with like magic, and he was always writing talismans, and he and his sheikh were doing exorcisms all the time, and he had a big book of, they call it asrar, of secrets that I was never allowed to have access to because I was never good enough to access to, and it was
Mm.
always like I was never good enough to kind of up to go up in my spiritual journey because there was always something wrong
Mm.
with me and what I was doing. So it was a very, unfortunately, spiritually abusive and religiously abusive environment in many ways. So it wasn't
Mm.
until much later when I was able to learn more about this healthy embodied spirituality. It didn't happen in those early years.
Mhm.
Even though I was exposed to good communities, because
Mm.
of the psychological hold my ex and his sheikh had, I couldn't
Mhm.
open up to them, you can say.
Mm.
And I
Yeah.
actually, those years, I didn't have a lot of friends. I was very closed off in
Mhm.
general,
Mhm.
because of that.
Mhm.
So it wasn't until, well, towards the end of my marriage, I had gone to the land in Pope Valley, and I had taken hand
Mm.
with Seedy, and I felt like almost like a rebellion against my ex. He didn't like it, but he didn't refuse or didn't forbid me from
Mhm.
doing that,
Mhm.
because at least they're Sufi and Muslims, right? So as I started to do more things that were um against his, way of being Sufi.
Mhm.
So being part of that community was much more healing. But I didn't go through the Sufi school. I was just part of the community and would visit, and I just loved being part of the community.
Yeah.
But really, when I found that embodiment was not through Sufis or Muslims at all, which is
Mm.
interesting. It
Mm.
was really through that Jewish somatic therapist who told me that that in your tradition, you can pray, and if you read the Quran, it'll actually help regulate your nervous system. And I was like, really? Like, what are you talking about? So she was like telling me to pray. And then
Yeah.
I had gone to a clinic at UCLA. It was like the East West. It was a regular doctor. He was also
Yeah.
a Jewish doctor. And he's like, "Oh, you're Muslim, right?" I was like, "Yeah." So he's like, that if you actually engage in your regular ritual practices, it can really help you and get better wellness." Because my body was also broken at that time too, because I was just
Mm.
so in such a difficult place. So I had these two Jewish mental health and medical professionals telling me to go pray and read the Quran. And I was so confused because I was kind of angry at, Islam in general. And then these two
Mm.
non-Muslim professionals telling me to go do this. And so I was just like confused but intrigued as to that. And when it was like not Muslims telling me to do something, I was more willing to do it, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I was also really fed up within the mainstream, and most mainstream Muslims are pretty conservative. The mainstream Muslim community is this function of how shame works, right? Of if you're not doing all these things you got to do to be a good Muslim, then you're just going to end up in hellfire, right? So if you're not reading the Quran, if you're not praying all your prayers, it's not going to go well for you, basically. So I was very angry at Islam and the
Mhm.
patriarchy because of that.
Mhm.
So wasn't I at that point when I had was left my ex-husband, I was very broken. I stopped praying for a while just to see what would happen. Um, I was just trying to experiment, like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
And but when my somatic therapist kept on recommending me to like try praying and try reading the Quran,
Yeah.
I I realized that I needed to like reprogram myself. I
Mm.
realized that my associations with prayer, Islamic prayer, were really negative. My
Mm.
ex-husband probably has some kind of weird religious OCD, and the way that he taught me about it just wasn't very healthy. So I had to
Mhm.
make new intentions about prayer. And
Mhm.
also not pr I realized that I was praying because I was scared of the consequences, of the
Mm.
punishment that you'll receive if you don't pray.
Yeah.
So I completely reprogram and say, I'm going to pray because I want to feel that connection to God. I'm
Mhm.
praying because I have a longing for God, not because
Mhm.
I'm scared that God will punish me.
Right.
So coming back to my prayer practice took a long time. It
Mm.
helped in Istanbul, where unlike in the American Muslim community, where people kind of, if you're part of a community, people know you, you're kind of being you're being watched. And it's like a mosque is very anonymous in Turkey. No one knows you. It's not a community space. You can just go and pray. Um, so I think I healed my connection to prayer when I was in Istanbul just because it was a very normal thing to do.
Hmm.
And also just because Islamophobia can be really hard in the United States and getting a break from just having to be a Muslim, and I was a professional Muslim as I was a professor of Islam, and I was a
Yeah.
Muslim, and I was an interfaith activist, and I was always giving talks about Islam and interfaith events. When I went to Turkey, I finally got a break from all that, so I can
Yeah.
say, so I can ask myself, what does it mean to be a Muslim without being a professional Muslim and scholar of Islam who's teaching about Islam every single day? I
Yeah.
just got to turn that side off and just figure out what it means to be a Muslim. And so my path to embodiment was both just this kind of secular approach to learning interoception, which I
Hmm.
found magical because I really didn't know anything about my body, and
Hmm.
then combining that with reconnecting with prayer, with salat,
Hmm.
and it's something I still continue to work on,
Hmm.
because finding that presence, that khushua, that awe, that connection to God and prayer is something that every Muslim strives for, and a lot of us struggle to achieve. And so for me, first it was becoming grounded in this idea of embodiment, like
Hmm.
overcoming this disassociation, which still can happen to me every so often when I get triggered, when something difficult happens. I'd rather just
Hmm.
scroll on social media rather than like feel what's going on. But I do know
Totally.
now that it's much better to feel what's going on than to scroll social media. Um, you know, and
Yeah.
then adding upon it, so with my knowledge and my studying and training and very somatic and breathwork practices, I slowly realized that the rituals we have in Islam are incredibly wise and enriching. So I
Hmm.
start to realize that they're not only there because we got to do them, it's an annoying chore that we got to do, but I start to
Hmm.
realize through my secular training that, oh, wow, when we go to Sufi gatherings, we're doing dhikr together, we're actually doing breath work. The teacher just doesn't
Hmm.
mention it.
Hmm.
When we're doing prayer, well, it actually kind of looks like yoga, but we're
Yeah.
actually doing these amazing 5 times a day, this amazing physical movement that is
Hmm.
incredibly grounding for the body, and that's why we feel better after we pray.
Hmm.
And when we do, for example, we're using water to cleanse ourselves, to really renew our intentions, to get into the mindset of prayer. So over the years, as I've combined, I guess you could say my secular study of
Hmm.
embodiment, somatics, breathwork, and then applying it to my knowledge of Islam and Islamic rituals. And Islamic
Hmm.
rituals were my academic focus in Islam. I
Hmm.
studied sacred space and ritual as an
Yeah.
academic. And bringing all that together has been really powerful for me to realize
Mm.
that Islamic prayers and all the practices we have are not this annoying obligation that Muslims talk about,
Yeah.
but they're this amazing gift given to us to help us calm our nervous system, to stay balanced and in harmony with ourselves and with nature and with the earth around us. So now I see them in really different ways than I used to because of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of
Yeah.
that. Um, I, it's always fascinating and also inspiring to find parallels and commonalities in our different journeys. And I'm I love hearing about your renewed relationship with Salat, with this ritual Islamic prayer, and because I am, it's a journey. Uh, It's not like I had awareness of such an issue and then suddenly it was gone, like
Mhm.
I was done with it. I still work like my own journey with embodiment is still ongoing, you know. And a perfect example of that is, like if I'm doing I think you're aware that I'm a co-trainer of compassion-based spiritual direction, and which is an integration of internal family systems therapy, of the compassion practice, um, and also more contemplative spiritual direction. And so many folks will often approach that with a question of, uh, especially with IFS, like where do you feel, or what do you feel in your body, or where do you feel such and such a part in your body or where did you know? And if somebody asked me that kind of question, I just like shut down immediately. Like, I mean, it's as if someone lowered the curtain, turned off the lights, like we're done here.
Mhm.
Um, and yet, so then I have to like I have to work on something that helps me soften and open my heart. And then I can approach awareness of what's happening with my body once I have attended and gone through the doorway of my heart.
Mhm.
Um, so when you were talking about the ritual prayer Salah, I was like, oh, well, is that embodied spirituality? Is that embodied spirituality? Like, I was just thinking about the different ways that I experience, and so I'll share some of those, and you can give me share your wisdom and your
Yeah.
expertise. But so like one of the things that I do, I don't know how common this is, but I think in our particular order of Sufism, one of the things that is a practice is just to look at the name of God and to visualize that like written in your heart or visualize it in front of you. So I will often pray salat in a space where I have the name of God. And and I don't quite have the words for this, but it's as if I imagine. And again, I don't have quite I don't quite have the words, but it's like, so I'm going to say, as if I imagine light, love, energy, like something coming from my heart to the name, um, in the heavens to the day, like, there's no space, there's no place, but it's like, and it's like there's an umbilical cord, like they're praying, like there's this umbilical cord of energy, of love, of light, of something um, that happens. And if I actually focus on that during my salat, like my experience totally, like it totally changes, Like I can go through the motions, but then if I go through the motions and I add this particular component to it, I can feel the difference in my body.
Mm.
I can feel the difference in my heart, like just even mentioning it.
Mhm. That's
I
really
told,
beautiful, Habib. Yeah.
I told you earlier I was a softie and I might cry. So here we go. Gonna
What a
start
beautiful thing to
crying.
cry about is thinking about your connection with Allah when you're in salat. That's a beautiful thing to think about. If we could all cry when we think about that, it's powerful because a lot of Muslims pray in a mechanical way. They, especially ones who are born and raised Muslim, they just pray because they've been taught that way.
Yeah,
I don't know how much presence they're finding. And present just means, are you aware of what's going on within you, your thoughts, your feelings, your bodily experiences and perception, right? Are you aware of that? Or are you just doing it and you're not even paying attention? Like sometimes like I'll be driving somewhere and then I get to that place, I'm like, did I just drive here? Like I wasn't aware of driving. And I think we can all relate to that, like because we do things robotically, and I think that happens a lot
right.
with prayer as well. It's so
Yeah.
easy because we do it all the time if we're trying to practice, right? And
Yeah.
so to really pause and to really find that presence, and I think what you're talking about is khushua, is that state of being in this connection with the divine. It's such a beautiful
Mm,
thing that I'd say most of us don't experience every prayers, but
right.
something we strive for, right? And that we're having this full experience. Prayer is not supposed to be just I recite and then I'm done. It's what's interesting about Islamic prayer versus like Christian prayer is like they pray like this and they're saying something, but it's not really with the body per se. Our
Mhm.
prayer is very specifically designed to be a full embodied experience. You have to move every part of your body. First of all, you have to wash your limbs with water before you pray, and then you have to move every limb and every part of your body. including all the way prostrating to the ground, which before I became Muslim, I was like, I'm never gonna do that. I'm not gonna like pray to the ground. It's a very weird thing for Americans to like prostrate to the ground. But when I
Mm,
started to experience it, and I started to experience that humility, and
mm,
the only entity I'll experience humility to is to the divine, not to another human. Right? I'm
mm,
just like, I am your servant. I am nothing. And that prostration, that sujood to the ground really helps us feel what humility is like, to humble ourselves before God. We feel that in that prostration position, right? If we just
yeah,
stood up and prayed, we're not going to feel it. So our
yeah,
practice is literally designed to integrate our body, our mind, and our soul into one. And it's an incredibly beautiful practice that if we're present in this practice, it's a way to keep us safe and protected and connected as often as possible, right? We're supposed to keep dhikr on our tongue, on our heart at all times, and we have 5 times a day prayer in order to keep that connection because we know that once we forget, once we get neglectful, once we start getting distracted, so easy to forget. And that's why we've been given 5 times a day
right, right,
because we're so forgetful as human beings.
yeah, yeah. I'm
So
so
there's so
glad you
much
brought up.
wisdom. Yeah.
I'm sorry, what?
And there's so much wisdom in each one
Oh,
of the practices that we
yeah,
have.
yeah.
Reciting the Quran, for example, and the way you recite the Quran, if you're trained to read with tajweed, the correct pronunciation,
Hmm.
the way that tajweed is actually a form of breath work. So people who are professional or training to become good Quran reciters are actually learning very controlled breath work. So it's
Mm,
actually like calming your nervous system as you recite it, because there's certain letters and words that really like work your entire throat and even part to your
mm,
chest, right? And like have
mm,
your tongue do different things, like saying the ayn, like some of the
right,
letters of Arabic are like really deep in your throat. And then to listen
right,
to the Quran is also an experience that's very calming for us, right? So all parts of our religion actually have so much divine embodied wisdom if we
mm-hmm,
reframe it. So that's actually, I'm developing a workshop with a friend of mine on supporting Muslims who feel disconnected from prayer but really want to get
mm,
back to prayer is like we have
mm,
to reframe and relearn what prayer is, because I think a lot of Muslims have negative associations. They have stories about prayer that can be very
yep,
negative. I've met a lot of Muslims who were, as children, beaten by their family if they didn't
mm,
pray. I mean, they
wow,
were told that they're bad people if they don't pray, and so they just stop praying. And some people are like, I'm not pure enough, so I'm just not going to pray. So a lot of
wow,
Muslims have very negative and harsh stories about prayer, so that makes it very hard for them to pray. It makes it
yeah,
very hard for them to keep praying or feel presence in prayer. So there needs
mm,
to be a lot of work to support Muslims to return to prayer
mm-hmm,
completely from scratch. They have to tell themselves and create a new story of prayer,
mm-hmm,
essentially.
mm-hmm, mm. It ma- it makes me think of what your comment earlier about I forget exactly how you phrased it, but something along the lines of my initial um, exposure to Sufism and Islam coming through such a beautiful Sufi community. And it is such a privilege, and it was such a privilege to come to Islam and Sufism through the community that I came through because I experienced, and I've said this on previous episodes, but I think it's okay to say it again. My experience of the Sufi Sheikh was as if he was saying, "Here, would you like a taste of love?"
Mm,
Uh, and then, would you like more? You know, would you like more than that? You know, and that's how I experienced Sufism and Islam. And I mean, it was as if I was just getting increasingly greater tastes of love. And I was so shocked the first time I was in a Muslim community and I realized that I was surrounded by a bunch of Muslims who their experience of the mosque or of Islam or of cultural Islam or of their family's relationship to Islam was very much like my childhood experience
mm,
of Christianity, of the culture of the church that I went to. And I was so shocked by that because in my mind, it was love. What is Islam? I would have said love.
mm.
I mean, at that point, I don't know that I would have even talked about surrender or peace. I would have just been love, love, love. And so it's so interesting in terms of our journeys. And I, of course, like, oh yeah, I was very naive at that point, wasn't I? And it took so much for me to go, oh, people are people.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what religion you're in, what culture you're in, what tradition. People are people. And you're going to find that in every place, there are people who are going to approach something through the lens of love, and they are going to bring love and kindness and compassion and mercy. And there are other people that are going to be challenged in doing that. So, and approaching that. But there's a point here. It's that because of that approach, like when I was first on the prayer mat and I learned how to pray salat by a friend doing little stick figures on post-it notes.
I love it.
And then another friend who was not Muslim, but whose father had traveled in, some Muslim majority countries, had brought back prayer rugs, gave me, so another friend gave me a prayer rug, so like it was this kind, I got my post-it
Yeah.
notes, I got my prayer rug. But when I was on the prayer rug, I felt like I'd come home
Mm,
in a way that I had not experienced before. Like I just felt like, oh, in a place of deep, beyond words, soul, I'm home. You
mhm,
know, that was my experience of the prayer rug. And I think that it coming through the lens of through the doorway of love,
mhm,
it was accessible.
mhm,
That sense of home, of coming home was accessible. And since then, years later, I have that sense of sujood. You use the word sujood, prostration. Like for me, that's home.
mhm,
There is really, um, there isn't another place where I feel as at home
mhm,
as I do in prostration
mhm.
on the prayer rug.
That's really beautiful, and it's amazing you were able to learn about it in such a way that you weren't, I guess, corrupted or, like harmed by external forces. In my beginning of being a Muslim, I also had the most beautiful prayer experiences before I kind of learned from conventional Muslims. When I
Yeah.
meet Muslims who like are untouched by what I've seen, like I still see them as, I often say ignorance is bliss. I wish that I didn't see and learn as much as I did because it would be much easier to just like have learned that beautiful type of Islam and stop there. But no,
Mhm.
I had to go get two more degrees, spend 20 years deconstructing Islam in Western Academy in graduate school and as professor, and it completely ruined my approach to religion. Really, I would say
Yeah.
my PhD program, which was at Chapel Hill, which is a very secular program in the
Mhm.
study of religion, um,
Mhm.
was not a good place to be a practicing Muslim and to study Islam. And I didn't realize it at the time.
Right.
It wasn't until I went to teach at a Lutheran university where all my colleagues, most of them were actually ordained pastors in various denominations. And it was
Mhm.
a religion and theology department. And I was able to heal from what being in a secular religious studies department did to me in terms of my faith and
Mhm.
my approach to Islam. So I not only had the Western academic approach to religion, Islam, that was quite harmful for my own faith as a Muslim because when you deconstruct something to the point where, like, where's the meaning? What's the purpose? Like, what's under this? It's all just human made, and you start to take things apart till it loses meaning. So I had that challenge of Western academia, of they in Arabic, we say the waswasa shaitan, the whispers of Satan were in my ears daily through Western
Mm,
academic studies of Islam. And
mhm,
then I was studying Islam and I was studying all the different patriarchal interpretations and I was teaching about, I was teaching about Islam post 9/11 United States. Mainly we're talking about terrorism, it seems.
mhm,
And I encountered, and I always wanted to be part of Muslim community, so I was going to mosque, and most mosques are conservative, and I was ex treated not always in the best way because my gender, stuck into back rooms, treated like shit because I'm a woman, and disrespected because I'm a woman. So many negative experiences, even though I've had many
mhm.
positive ones, they ate at me. They ate at me and
Yeah,
made it so difficult. And I was like, ah, if only I hadn't like gone through all that. I didn't have to learn so much. I could have just stopped at the love. That would have been really wonderful. But my curiosity, they say curiosity killed the cat. It's like,
yeah,
darn it, couldn't I have just stopped and like not kept on going? It would have been easier. But Allah designed me to be very, very curious and to pursue a path that's quite difficult in
yeah.
that my curiosity, but also my need to keep learning is both beautiful and generous, but also could be harmful at the same time.
Mm, mm. I will say that I was very fortunate in where I went to school. And there is something about academic environments that's hard on the heart,
Hmm.
you know.
But you were
And
at GTU, right? So,
I was at, I did my Islamic studies portion
yeah.
at Bayan Islamic Graduate School,
Okay, yeah, that's right.
and I did my Christian part of my studies at Claremont School of
Oh, at
Theology.
Claremont, sorry, it's Claremont School of
Yeah,
Theology.
yeah. Which is across the street, or at the
Yeah,
time it was across the
yeah,
street from GTU.
yeah.
Um, and so there was, and still are, amazing people at Bayan and Claremont School of Theology. And still, if like coming from the environment that I had come from before, the University of Sufism environment
Hmm.
and the retreat center in Pope Valley, like that was so rich and heartful, kind of like in a continuous stream,
Yeah.
that being in an academic environment was like being in a desert, you know.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, so I can relate to some extent.
Yeah. And of
Yeah,
course, being a seminary was like, I would say 100 times better than being a secular
right,
public university. So imagine, yeah,
right.
what it might have been like in a public university, secular
Yeah, I
university.
don't want to.
You don't want to.
I don't want to.
I was led there, but in retrospect, I wouldn't have studied there if I had known what it would have
Right,
done to my iman, my faith. Yeah.
right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's certainly something about academia that, and this is cross tradition and it's cross school, and it doesn't, and I think that even with amazing faculty members, um, that there's something in academia that encourages an overemphasis on the mind and an
Hmm.
underemphasis on the heart.
Hmm.
And I was very fortunate to have Dr. Elaine Doherty, who wrote the book From Mindfulness to Heartfulness.
Oh, beautiful.
I was able to find people at Bayan and at CST that had heartfulness.
Mm-hmm.
And without it, I don't think I could have made it through. You know, I don't think I could have gotten the PhD had I been in a purely academic environment.
Yes.
Um, so,
That's amazing. And that's exactly why it was such a struggle and why I never was able to gain more like body intelligence through academia because I was in an environment that encouraged me to cultivate my mind, which was a good thing, but never encouraged to look below the mind. So I
mm,
only focused on my head and my entire rest of the body was neglected throughout all
yeah,
those years and never knew. I had colleagues who studied like embodiment in Islam, the body in Islam. I had a colleague who studied breathwork in Islam and they've
mm,
never tried those practices themselves. They've only intellectualized them. And I couldn't believe
oh,
when I met people who study this and they've never tried an embodiment practice, but they've
yeah,
spent 3 years writing about it, researching it. It's
mm,
unbelievable.
yeah,
What academia does in terms of distancing the scholar from the subject and from even to study embodiment from an intellectual perspective blows my mind.
yeah,
To not actually
yeah,
try it yourself. So there's good things about academia, but they no longer are good for me.
right. It reminds me of a teaching, excuse me, a saying from one of my teachers, and I'm gonna obviously paraphrase to the extent that I I can, but that true intellect, it requires the light of the soul coming through the doorway of the heart to the mind and informing the mind. So that if the mind is not in relationship with the heart and the soul, then that's not true intellect. You know, the mind needs the light of the soul and the light of
I
the
agree.
heart.
I agree. That's
Yeah.
beautiful.
This has been a wonderful conversation. To wrap things up, I want to uh, emphasize the rahmah, the mercy, the compassion. And I know that that's a big part of what your focus on is on. Your website is Compassion Flow. You're obviously wanting to approach. Um, any last thing that you might offer in terms of bringing together embodied spirituality and Rahma, bringing compassion that you might offer to our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing is that when people think about Islam, and this is Muslims themselves thinking about Islam, it's not the first thing that comes to mind, Rahmah. Lots of other
Mhm.
things will come to mind. But for me, I realize that when I read the Quran, Rahmah is all over the Quran. I mean, literally we say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, calling upon the most compassionate qualities of Allah more than any other names. Like I'm like, why are we saying the Rahman Rahim, the most compassionate, the tenderly merciful? Why are we saying these names more than other names? There must be a reason. And then how many times does this word forms of this word show up in the Quran? Allah talks about forgiveness and mercy and compassion more than the punishment, right? The punishment needs to be there in Islam to motivate people to be good. But people often forget that the concept, I really think Rahma is a core value of Islam
Mhm.
and a
Mhm.
core concept that is really overlooked by a lot of Muslims. And
Mhm.
so, I'm writing this book and I'm creating this idea of, or asking these questions of Muslims of what would it be like if we approach Islam and the way we teach about Islam and interact with other Muslims with Rahma as our touch point. You know, if Rahma is the way we interact with people, if the Rahma is the way we teach about Islam, how would that change things? Because with the way that scholars and religious leaders nowadays, I'm talking about North America primarily, but this can definitely go beyond that. There's not much Rahma in what a lot of people are teaching. There's examples of good teachers who focus on that, but we need
Mhm.
so much more of this compassion in our religion because
Mhm.
we're really weighing too heavily on the more negative aspects, on the fear-based motivation to religion, where I really think we need to take this approach of being connected and being motivated by this idea of rahma, by love and compassion. They really are good motivators for many of us, and especially as we mature, they can be good motiv maybe for children, they need a little bit of this fear and to motivate them, but as we mature and walk this
Mhm.
path,
Mhm.
I really can't imagine a way that's not focused and centered around Rahma. So it really is what Islam is. Yeah, so it means being trauma informed. It means teaching about Islam in a way that is kind and generous. And the thing is, Muslims already like that. It's not like I'm teaching something that's different or against Islam. It's just that to the very core from which we should talk about Islam, from which we teach about Islam, I believe should be focused on that.
Yeah, I agree. And I'll just offer that I've mentioned before that I feel like anybody on the planet and everybody on the planet who could possibly do so should study with Dr. Rosina Fauzia Al-Rawi.
Yeah.
Um, one of the practices that she gave me when I was on retreat with her was to recite Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim 21 times
Mhm.
between every ayat of the chapter that I was reading. So
Oh,
I would
interesting.
read like, one verse and then recite Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So for our listeners, non-Arabic speaking listeners, in the name of God, the universally merciful, the singularly compassionate, the most merciful, the most compassionate, the most gracious, the bestower of grace. There's So that was the practice that she gave me to help clear my misconceptions about God.
Mm,
Um, and so it was a way for me to begin to embody a relationship to God as the most merciful and the most compassionate and the loving. So
yeah, we need many more teachers like her, and we need the way she and others teach, like to become more mainstream because her teaching is quite uncommon, unfortunately. And I would like to
mhm.
see the way she teaches as becoming a normal way to teach about Islam, and rather than a little niche approach. Inshallah,
Yes.
we'll see
I,
that.
yes, God willing, yes. I so many times where I've been in a mosque or I've listened to a khutbah or I've listened to a speaker and I've thought it's as if they have studied only the qualities of majesty and severity and none of the
Exactly.
divine names of love and mercy and kindness and
Exactly.
you know
Yeah.
and I feel like uh it comes back to for me Sidi Muhammad al-Jamal saying if a person who is Jewish, if a person who is Christian, if a person who is Muslim knows their religion well, they know that there's only one religion, and that's the religion of love and
Yeah.
peace and mercy.
Mhm.
So may we all know that there is only one religion, and that's the religion of the Rahmah, the religion of mercy and compassion and love and peace and justice and freedom for all without separation. So, on that note, thank you so much for a great conversation. I appreciate your being here.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. It's so fun to talk about these subjects with you.
Likewise.
Thank you,
And thank you
Habib.
to all listeners for joining us on Beyond Names. Before we go, briefly, if you would please take one breath, pause, and reflect for just a moment on anything that stays with you from this conversation. Mm. Thank you. The conversation inspires in me a renewed commitment to do those things that I know through which I experience Salat as as a time of intimacy, a time
Mhm.
of loving connection. So thank you for your conversation inspiring that.
Alhamdulillah.
So excuse me, may something you heard today help you reconnect with the light in your own heart. May you grow in compassion and clarity and courage. May you find your way again and again back home to yourself, back home to the divine, however you name it. If today's conversation spoke to you, please like, share, and comment on this episode. And please follow and subscribe to Beyond Names. To make an appointment with me, please visit habibboerger.com. Until next time, may you be light. May you consciously participate in growing your light. And may you share your light. Peace be with you.